All right, welcome to your first lesson on Python. So let's talk a little bit about this programming language, Python. It was designed by Guido van Rossum in the late 1980s. It was the first published version. The first published version was released in 1991. And it's actually not named after the snake python like the logo would suggest. It kind of looks like two snakes together. But it's actually named after a British comedy group called Monty Python. And the story goes that Van Rossum was watching Monty Python as he developed the programming language over a long weekend. And he had some time off from his job, so he developed a programming language that he felt was more intuitive and readable. And we are using the third version of Python. So why Python? Python is designed to be readable and intuitive. So it's not only is it a high-level language, but it's designed so that people can kind of understand it just by looking at it. They can understand the programs and what is going on with the programs. It's simple, so many people who are not expert programmers use it. So people who are like in other fields can quickly learn how to use it, and you can use it for their own purposes. So people use Python as a basis for programming, like for Arduinos or Raspberry Pis. And other people have designed extra programs for Python. These programs are called libraries that are open source, so they're free and anyone can use them. So by learning Python and learning how to use these libraries, you get a lot of bang for your buck, as they say. So you can get a lot of use from understanding just this one programming language versus other programming languages. And I just want to remind you to check yourself. There's a Check for Understanding quiz for my students on Quizzes, the website, and you should just be making sure that you're answering questions as they go along. All right, the first big idea for programming is the print function. So whenever you learn a programming language, the first thing you ever want to learn is how to display things on a screen. It's the most basic function for programming languages. So in Python, the way that we do it, in Python version 3, it's a little different for version 2, but in version 3, if we have this as an input, so if this is our code, the output here is on the screen to the right. So let's notice some things. First of all, to print something, which is just to display it, it doesn't make it come out of my printer, it just displays it on the screen in the output field here. I use the keyword print, and I use open parentheses, and I put a value inside those parentheses, okay? So print 45 results in the number 45. Print hello world results in the phrase hello world without the quotation marks. Print true results in uppercase true being printed here. Now we're going to go over these different types of things that we can put inside the parentheses, or these different inputs, because you can see in the development environment that we use, they all have different colors, and there's a reason for that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in this video. Okay. The second big idea is how to create variables. So usually in a programming language, again, you learn print function first, or you learn how to display something, and then you talk about how to create variables. So in Python, there are 3 parts to a variable statement. There's the name of the variable, there's an equality sign, and there's a value here. So unlike some other programming languages, it's really easy in Python to declare a variable. You just name it, you give it an equal sign, and you give it the value that you want it to have. And this value can be a number, it can be a word, and it actually can also be a truth value like true or false. So here, there's going to be some rules for naming, but it's really simple in Python to name a variable. I don't have to declare it as a certain type of variable, and the equality sign here is called an assignment. So we don't use equality in the equal sign in Python the same way you would in a math class, but you use it to assign a value like 8 to a variable. Note that the value has to be on the right side and the name has to be on the left side, and the equal sign, a single equal sign, separates the two. So the rules for naming variables, the variable names can contain letters, numbers, and underscores. Those are the only 3 things it can contain. But it cannot start with a number. It has to start with a letter. Okay, and it must not ever contain spaces, and you will get error messages if you have spaces. So if you want to name a variable, it's a good habit to name a variable based on what the value that the variable stores or will store later on in your program. So if you want to use multiple words, then you would use underscores to separate the words so that they appear separate, so they're more readable in your program. Okay. And variable names cannot contain keywords. Okay, so let's go over what a keyword is. Every programming language has a set of words that are sort of off limits for you to use casually in the program. So for us, for Python, an example of these keywords are print. So print is a command. You can't use it to name a variable. False and true, but note that's only if it's capital F and capital T. Those are values that you can store in a variable. They're truth values that you can store in a variable, but you can't use them as like the name of a variable. Else and global. These are some of the keywords. They are by no means all of the keywords in Python, and you will get an error message in your development environment that will say, okay, you're not allowed to use, these words because they're keywords, or something to that effect when you try to use them. So you can name variables a lot of different things, but you can't use keywords when you name them. Big idea number 3. So there's different things that we can store in the variable. So today is all about, variables and print functions, the two basic things you learn when you learn programming languages. So we're going to talk about the things that you are allowed to store in variables, a different type of data. Okay, and here's a chart. There are 4 different types of data that you can store in Python. The language recognizes 4 different types of data. There's one for text that's called string. And these are text or words. You always have to have quotation marks, and you can have single quote marks or double quote marks, but that indicates a text or a word, something that you want to use in the program as like words or text. And you put double quotes around it. And now you can put double quotes around like a space, and that would also be considered a string. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as we get into more complicated uses of data types. There's 2 values of numbers that you can use. An int, which is called int, that's short for integer. Now, integers are the whole numbers and their opposites. So we're looking at numbers like, 0, 90 and negative 90, negative 8 and 8. So everything that's a whole number that doesn't have a decimal here. There's a name for the numbers with decimals, and that's called float. Now, these are numbers, again, with decimals. So anytime a decimal appears, it is considered a float. Note that 6.0 is considered a float, even though that is equivalent to 6, the integer 6. Because it has a decimal here, it is considered a float. And finally, you have this other data type that's like neither a string nor is it a number. And these data types store truth values, so either true or false. Note that they have to be in upper and lower case here. And by the way, a string, anything with quotes around it would be a string. So if you say you put quotes around a number like quote 45, that would be recognized in the program as a string. And there's certain reasons why you would want to do that, and we're going to cover that later on. Okay, the last big idea is how variables can change values throughout your program. So this little program here does something very strange, and in mathematics, you're not allowed to do this in math, and that's why the equal sign here is different than the equal sign in mathematics. Okay, the equal sign in mathematics says that it is that whenever you see x, you're allowed to replace it with the value of 8. And also in mathematics, we're allowed to switch the number around the equal sign with the variable. So I could say 8 equals x, and that would also be okay. Not in the programming language. Okay, so let's take a moment here and look at what's happening. Okay, when I run this, and let me pull this up. When I run this, let's watch what happens. So when I say x equals 8, x equals 10, and I say print x, what we think might happen, well, you may not be sure. You may think it prints 10. You may think it prints X. You may even think that it will have an error here. Let's run it and check it out. So it gives us the value of 10 here. Now the reason why it gives us this value is because what you've actually done, let's go back to our format here. So what it's actually done is it's taken the value of 8. So it's like, okay, X is equal to 8. But then what you've done is you said, okay, now store 10 in X. And the program doesn't care what came before it. It reads line 1 and then it reads line 2, and you're allowed to give it a different value. So it's like you have a box and you've put 8 in it, and then you've dumped out that 8 and you've put 10 in it. And when you say, okay, when you say print X, it's asking the program to display what's stored in that variable. And so it gives you 10 because you've dumped out 8 and you've given it 10. It can't store both values at once in a variable, but it can reassign the value of the variable from 8 to 10. Okay? And that's the end of the lesson today. Make sure you've answered all the check for understanding questions.